Jack Pike was only 5 years old when he vanished while on a trip with his mother and father in the woods. His mother began frantically looking for Jack, and then during her search she heard a loud, blood-squealing scream coming from up the hill. As she looked in that direction and she listened to her little boy screaming, it cut off as if somebody had covered up his mouth, and that would lead to one of the largest searches in Minnesota's history. More on Jack's story today, as well as some others in our Missing 411 series on the Spook Report. Hey guys, Zach here with the Spook Report, and today we're going to be talking about Missing 411 and some strange disappearances in the state of Minnesota. So, in Minnesota, there's a small area, a cluster of which a bunch of missing person cases have popped up over the decades, and in particular, they all fall under that Missing 411 category. So very strange, unusual disappearances that just don't meet the normal disappearance criteria. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about some kid cases as well as some adult cases, and I just want to go ahead and say that we got to keep in mind that these are human beings, people, family members who have passed. So as always, let's be respectful, but at the same time, let's get that information out there so that people know about it. I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much for all the support you guys have been giving me in the comments section, as well as to all the new subscribers that have joined. Thank you guys so much, seriously. The comments you are leaving for me are so awesome. I'll just put it that way. It gives me a lot of excitement to get the next video made for you. Again, thank you guys so much, and let's go ahead and get into the video. Jack Pike and his family were out on a road trip for the day to go pick blueberries. His mother, his father, and Jack exited the vehicle and began picking blueberries in this wooded area not too far from Minnesota on the Canadian side of the border. Now, the mother and father were kind of picking berries, and they looked down and they noticed Jack had disappeared. He was just there a few moments prior, and now he was gone. So they began calling for Jack and looking around when out of nowhere they heard this terrible sound. Jack screaming at the top of his lungs, and before he could finish his scream, it was almost as if something covered his mouth and cut him off. The mother at this point, her instincts kicking in, totally freaked out and just bolted in the direction of the scream. She ran for what she approximately thought was 100 meters and found nothing. This led to one of the largest searches in this area's history. Over 2,000 searchers joined in and began looking for little Jack. Jack was only 5 years old at the time of his disappearance. So a massive search kicked out. They looked everywhere. They could find nothing. Then one day, one searcher, 4 days later, just happened to be walking on the other side of a river quite far away when he stumbled across Jack. Jack was laying in a bush completely dry and not really responsive. He picked Jack up and rushed him to the hospital. At this point, everyone was trying to figure out what happened to Jack. How did he get on the other side of the river? How was he dry? And he was alive. It was a miracle, right? The father rushed to the hospital first. He got there. He asked the doctors, what's going on with Jack? Is he okay? The doctor said he's completely fine. He's got no wounds. He hasn't been injured or anything like that. He's just dehydrated at this time. Now, Jack would wake up and see his father and say, "Hi, Daddy," and that would be the last thing he would ever say to his father. Jack would unfortunately and sadly pass away shortly after. Doctors could not pinpoint what caused his death. They speculate it was either exposure or dehydration. Really sad story, obviously. But the strange situation here is it is pretty clear that Jack was abducted by something. But my question is what lured him away from his parents in the first place, followed by what was capable of making him go silent mid-scream and getting out of there fast enough that his parents couldn't find him, or over 2,000 searchers. Additionally, how did he get across the river without getting wet and survive for 4 days without any food? It's a really strange situation. But again, we're talking about missing 411 cases, and these are some of the strangest disappearances that you're going to encounter or hear about. So go ahead down in the comments below. Let me know what you think happened to Jack and kind of speculate. In this case, I want to feel like it was human intervention, but at the same time, it's kind of weird that no one saw anything. 2,000 searchers looking for Jack and they didn't find him. It's hard to know. But let's go ahead and head on to our second story of the day. Larry Coleman was a 3-year-old boy who was out visiting his grandparents' farm with his 3 siblings and parents when he disappeared. The family was out exploring the back end of their farm. It's an expansive piece of property, and everyone was walking together. They were having fun, and at some point in time, Larry just disappeared from the group. No one heard him, no one saw him leave. It was just as if one moment he was there, the next moment he was gone. Larry was a young boy, wasn't really capable of getting too far, especially in this type of setting. And we're talking rural, rugged farm. This is the back end of a farm, so it's not well maintained. There's all kinds of obstacles. Now, the family began calling Larry's name out. You know, his 3 siblings, his parents, and his grandparents were all calling his name out and looking for him, and it got nowhere. They didn't hear a call back, nothing. So they immediately knew, we need to get more people in this. We need to find Larry. He's only 3 years old. Now, they called in the local search and rescue team, the sheriff, and the National Guard. Over 1,000 people combed this property in this area and began looking for 2 miles out. They found nothing. One searcher brought out his Labrador, and the dog was sniffing the area out, trying to get a scent for little Larry, and the dog picked up a scent, and it led them to a swamp. Now, at the swamp, the dog began whining and, like, being really kind of scared, didn't want to go any further. It stopped at the edge of the swamp, and the sheriffs and searchers all decided, like, hey, this is a clue. There's something here. So they searched that area, and unfortunately, they found nothing. But very strange. Now, several months would go by. Larry was missing, obviously, and at this point, when a 3-year-old's out for more than several days, you have to assume the worst. But several months go by, and a game warden happened to be searching the area for whatever reason, probably looking for trappers or illegal hunters, and came across some clothing. It belonged to a little boy, and looking back and remembering the case of Larry, he searched the area and he indeed found the body of Larry Coleman. Very sad, tragic story. The strange situation here with this case is that Larry disappeared in front of family and friends without so much as being seen or heard, which is very strange, because you imagine walking with your family in a park somewhere and you have your 3-year-old boy in front of you. You take your eyes off of him for a moment and he just vanishes. If you were to call his name out, you'd likely get a response, or you would hear him trampling through the bushes. Now, this didn't happen in this case, and that is one of the common factors we see in the missing 411 cases. Now, children who go disappearing often are found in swamps without their clothes. It's a very sad true nature event. You know, we find children who are missing articles of clothing. I believe we covered this in one of our videos previously. Swamps and swamp briars, these areas are well known within the missing 411 to have children disappearances. It's almost as if they're brought there, and you know, whatever happens to them happens to them. Additionally, we have a child covering a long distance that just doesn't make sense for a 3-year-old. Now, he was found over 2.5 miles away in a swamp on a little island patch in the middle of this swamp with none of his clothes on. And it's not probable for a 3-year-old to make that trip, that distance whatsoever. So all of these situations compiled together really spell something strange happening to Larry. As we continue to talk about these cases and you watch these videos, you're actually going to start putting 2 and 2 together. So right now you're only getting, you know, a portion of one person's story, but as I tell you the stories of 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 people, you all begin to compile it together and realize, like, these aren't just disappearances. There's something happening here that is far bigger than anyone thought, because They all have these similarities that just do not make sense. When you hear the story individually, you're like, okay, well, it's possible one person, one child could make that journey. But when you hear it 100 times over, when you hear it 1,000 times, you begin to realize, why are all these strange cases having the same exact phenomenon happening to them? It's just unexplainable. So anyway, that is the story of Larry. Unfortunately, it did not end well. 2 stories in a row now in which there's a sad ending. Now we go on to our third story. Kevin Ayotte was a 3-year-old boy in Minnesota who was last seen upstairs playing in his bedroom. His mother was downstairs cleaning the house when she stepped outside for a moment to get some fresh air. When she stepped back into the house, she went upstairs to check on little Kevin, and he was no longer there. Now, Kevin had been in the home with his older brother and his dog, and the dog was missing, and so was Kevin. So she walked over to the brother and said, "Hey, where's your brother?" He says, "I don't know." This obviously, once again, induced a panic in the mother. She ran outside calling for Kevin and immediately called the authorities, describing the situation that her son, had disappeared. Now, a massive search went off, and then in this particular area of Minnesota, we have tons of missing person cases. A lot of them are young children under the age of 5 who disappear. Kevin is the second 3-year-old in this video we've talked about who has disappeared. The search went off, they found nothing. It was almost as if he vanished. The sheriff speculated that Kevin probably followed his dog outside to go play with it, or just followed the dog and was led off to the complete wilderness. This area is very rural, rugged, full of forests, lakes, swamps, rivers. A lot of dangerous places for a child to be. This massive search went off, they found nothing, and for Kevin's situation, to this date, they have never found anything. I do believe the dog returned back home, but they never found Kevin. And one of the very strange situations here that links this to the other missing 411 cases we're talking about is that the dog was involved. A child disappeared in the presence of his, family, essentially. The mother was outside on the front porch. One moment he was in the house, next moment he wasn't. In these missing 411 cases, dogs are often found to be leading people away from the home or running off in the woods chasing something, and the children chasing after the dogs. Now, I can tell you from my personal experience as a younger me, I think I was 6 years old or 7 years old, I was walking one of my dogs outside, and at the time I had this big old husky named Buck. And Buck would like to chase things, but I was out near the woods near my house in a very wooded area in Washington State. And he just yanked as hard as he could on the leash and started growling, and he managed to rip the leash out of my hand and run off in the woods. Not thinking anything for my personal safety, I ran into the woods after my dog. And I looked for him for a half an hour to an hour, and it got dark out. And by the time I got him, I was exhausted. I was sitting on the ground and I was crying my hands out. Because I was like, I just lost my parents' dog. He was my best friend kind of thing. And I don't know where he comes walking out of the dark up to me. And he's like, "Oh, hey, let's go home." And it was the strangest thing. It was like, where the hell have you been for the last hour, dude? So I got the leash, and then I started trying to find my way out of these woods. Thankfully, I had a light source to go, but the entire time I just had this uneasy feeling that I was not alone. Even though Buck was there, Buck was a big dog, very protective, it made me extremely uncomfortable. And after that, I started exploring those woods more with my friends, and we found some really strange stuff out there. And in a future video, I'll tell you guys a little bit more about it, but I managed to get home. But in this situation, I can understand Kevin playing with his dog and going out into the wilderness. Sometimes when your loved pet gets away, you don't think, you just go after it. It would be in the same situation if my child ran into the dark, creepy forest. I don't care what's in there, I'm going after my child. So, I'm going to tell you guys another story real quick, and then we're going to end this video and we'll talk about it. Earl Somerville was a 48-year-old man in Minnesota who had tons of experience going into the wilderness. This man was a logger his entire life. He spent many summers and winters in the Minnesota wilderness surviving. So one day Earl decided to leave camp and go to a swampy area where he would go hunting for small game. Well, after some time, Earl did not return, and tons of people began to worry, so they contacted the local authorities. This led to a massive search in Minnesota that would actually call in the Canadian police as well to search on their side of the border. It's a very small area. Half is in Canada, half is in the US. Now, this search led to nothing. Earl would never be seen or found again. None of his equipment or gear would be found. What makes this case so interesting is it's in that swampy area in Minnesota that once again someone has disappeared, but this time an experienced adult male who has decades of experience living in the wilderness and living off the land with zero signs of being found. Now, in this particular area of Minnesota, we're talking 15, 20 missing person cases that all have similarities that bring them together. And we have to ask ourselves, what is going on in Minnesota, in these swamps, in these forests? What is causing people to disappear? It's a very strange situation, and I can't help but ask myself, one, it seems to be mostly children, right? And these things have been going on from the 30s to now. So we still have disappearances in the 2000s. The last case I remember reading about was a 5-year-old girl in 2003 who disappeared not too far from this area as well. Similar circumstances. So what is happening? In all of these missing 411 cases, we have too many strange situations to rule it out to be a normal disappearance. Somebody getting lost in the woods. And in the case of Earl, a 48-year-old man, he could have survived for days in this wilderness. He had the experience, he had the equipment, but he was never seen again. The children are a different story. Children, you know, they're sensitive. They're a lot more prone to not surviving these types of situations, whereas an adult would. But in both situations, they both failed to survive. And even in the cases in which they did survive, which we found out, he died several days later from what doctors couldn't even determine to be whether dehydration or exposure after he was safely found. So, in these cases, I don't like to tell you what I think it is, kind of like the original author as well who found all these cases. Me personally, to say it's one thing may not be right, and it does them a disservice, but I would love to hear what you guys think is going on. For me, clearly some of these are human abductions. I had a comment someone posted that said that some of these clearly have to be human abductions. I would agree. I do find it strange that no one sees or hears anything. And, in some of these situations, these people are disappearing in the presence of other people, their loved ones. You're looking out for your loved ones. You're not so oblivious that you don't see a man walk into your group in the middle of nowhere. Think about it. If you're walking down a trail in the middle of nowhere and some random person comes up to you, everyone in the group's looking at that guy. Unless you're completely oblivious and you have no idea what's going on, you're going to know a stranger has just walked into your group. It just doesn't make any sense. But in some of these cases, I could see, a child being lured out. The case of the boy who disappeared out of his home following the dog. Someone could have lured the dog out of the house, and then from there, he was taken to the swamps or whatever, but we just don't know. And in any case, though, it's just terrifying to think about that. All of these cases, they were in their homes, they were out with their family members, and they all disappeared, and it all ended negatively. So, just keep that in mind, guys. Keep your loved ones close, keep an eye out, always keep your head on a swivel. Be aware what's around you, and take this knowledge that you learned today, carry it on into the next video. That's the biggest thing I want you to take away from this is remember the elements of these particular cases and pair them with others. If you haven't seen our last video, go check it out. I'll go ahead and add it here to the video that you can click and you can go watch it. build up your profile, learn all this information, and start connecting the dots yourself, and you will see why I have fallen in love with studying the Missing 411 series. Thank you guys so much. If you enjoy this type of content, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, comment below what you think's going on. Really helps us grow and tells the YouTube algorithm that you like this type of video, and it will share it with other people, and we can continue to get this information out to others. Thank you guys so much for watching the Spook Report. I'm Zach. Have a great day. If you want to see some of our other videos, go ahead and click on these images here. We've got some talking about missing 411 hunters, as well as some other missing children cases.